Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor. I'm the AV technician for the building. Just a side note for any questions coming from the audience this morning, the audience microphones, when you press it, it will turn green. You're good to go. Something else to note, you do have to be very close to these to be picked up. So be closer than you think and adjust accordingly if you don't hear yourself coming through. They're very directionally focused. So just try your best there. If not, we may have someone come with microphones and hand them out to you. Thank you.
All right, good morning. My name is Colonel Retired Michael Black. I'm the Vice President for Defense for AFCEA. I want to thank you for joining us for this morning session back here at the Georgia Cyber Center. We've got two back-to-back sessions this morning, starting with a presentation around understanding IT enterprise solutions for software with two leaders from Computer Hardware, Enterprise Software, and Solutions Office, the PEO EIS. And this session will be followed by a panel on technical weapons systems, continuous cybersecurity monitoring. It's my pleasure to introduce the speaker for the opening session speakers. We have Sarah Mullins, project lead for the CHESS product office at PEO EIS, and Gerry Lebel, the CHESS lead product officer. As CHESS product lead, Sarah leads a team responsible for establishing and maintaining no-fee flexible contracts through which the Army customers may procure COTS, IT, hardware, software, and services via e-commerce based process. And Gerry Lebel is the lead product officer for major projects such as ServiceNow and Microsoft, and is also responsible for maintaining and supporting CHESS software contracts. Their full bios can be found on our website or through the app. So ladies and gentlemen, just join me with a warm welcome for Sarah and Gerry.
Good morning. Okay, so we're going to talk to you about 3S and 4S. Obviously, we have the disclaimer that if it doesn't come from the KO, it's not official. So always look on sam.gov for any of the information, okay? And before we get into our lovely services contract, some of you may have received a 4H amendment last night. Please respond to it and direct all questions again to the KO. So this is our agenda. So Gerry's going to talk about 3S, I'll talk about 4S, and then what we need from industry.
Morning, everybody. The Information Technology Enterprise Solutions Soft Services third version is our current contract for providing a full range of innovative world-class technology, services, and solutions to support the Army enterprise infrastructure. The contract is open to all. It's mandatory for Army agencies effective 1 December 2020 with the DUSA memo, but it's open to all DoD and federal agencies. It follows all the Army standards and policies and works with the NETCOM enterprise initiatives to provide net-centric and network operations capabilities. It utilizes decentralized ordering, has a $12.1 billion ceiling, and like all CHESS contracts, is no fee for use of our services. The period of performance runs from September 2018 to September 2027 with a 5-year base period and 4 one-year option periods if exercised. The capabilities for that last option year can extend through for another 12 months. So it will run through 24 September 2028. It's an IDIQ type contract with 119 vendors, which includes 76 small and 43 large companies. The ordering is based on a decentralized purchasing and includes small business set-asides with socioeconomic capabilities for 4 hub zone, 13 service disabled, veteran-owned small businesses, and 29 women-owned small businesses. The vendors' proposal rates are the ceilings for each of the task order proposals, and the vendors' bid rates on the RFPs is how they're evaluated. There's 11 task order areas here with 117 labor categories, of which 26 have been more recently added based upon feedback from the vendors and the customers. This slide provides the scale and scope of the contract with the top 3 performers, the top spend by the contracting office location and current trends, and then the contract spend, the small business spend, and the non-DoD spend. 2 key points on this slide are that the non-Army usage is very significant. And if you look at those top 3 performers, Agile Defense is a small business. With the 76 small business companies that are on this contract, it's a very robust small business capability. So if you are a government organization, Army, DoD, or federal, and you have to meet small business goals, this is a great vehicle for you to be able to do that. This next slide depicts the usage of the contract with the first 6 months of this fiscal year, first 2 quarters, of the number of RFPs submitted, the number of RFIs submitted, and then the number of small business RFPs that were accepted. This number right here is the total number of RFPs for the entire contract. We are currently doing market research to determine if there are price adjustments needed based upon the current economic challenges. And as we are ending that 5-year base period this September, we're going to be recertifying and adjusting the small businesses. There are several small businesses that won't be classified as small businesses anymore. That will be done at the end of this base year period, which is 25 September of this year. And this is one of the key slides from the 3S portion. Being that this is the 5th year of the contract, we've had a number of lessons learned that we think are going to feed directly into 4S, as we're always interested in bettering our contracts and the execution thereof. Because the RFP percentage is how the businesses are evaluated, we found that there was a need for a gatekeeper to determine if there was an out-of-scope capability within each of the proposals as they came in. We wanted to further classify those out-of-scopes. So we've added some additional information into when a vendor bids out of scope to have them answer specific questions. And we've been working with the vendors on being able to train them on how to provide that information so we can make valid out of scope determinations. With 119 vendors, as I mentioned, there's a monthly and quarterly report that got to be quite excessive. So we've learned how to automate those into the ITE-Mart, which is our system for doing the RFPs and tracking the vendors' monthly and quarterly performance ratings. So we've automated that. So it's updated, they can automatically input them into the ITE-Mart. I mentioned earlier the 11 labor or task order areas and 117 labor categories. We've added the 26 at the high end of it. When we first started the contract, there wasn't necessarily a lot of interest in the artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the cloud services. So we have added those 26 and are always open to more. One of the key points here is that we've always had an annual meeting with the vendors, but we have found those to be instrumental because we have the contract and make it available to everybody, but we don't necessarily talk with even the Army customers. So we have an annual meeting with the vendors every year. We're starting later this month and run all the way through December. And we also have an ad hoc open door type policy. And the feedback that we have gotten from the vendors has been instrumental in being able to provide those improvements throughout the 3S period and leading into the 4S period.
Okay, now on to 4S. So a lot of it, like Gerry said, is going to stay very similar to 3S. You know, our estimated ceiling, the same. Contract type depends on what the customer is asking for. We are looking at getting another NAICS code on there to give more flexibility. And then, like we already said, similar scope as 3S. So right now, the market research is out there. The RFI has been posted. It's open until 31 August of this year. So you can go to sam.gov and find it. And then we're planning, FC is going to host an event in October, a symposium, and then we'll have our own industry day next spring. Okay, multiple NAICS codes. If you got input, please send it to us through the RFI process. Like Gerry mentioned, the different suites is kind of the high end versus the low end of the labor categories and what is needed. We're looking at how to split that up. So it's more conducive to what the customers need. We are planning to figure out how to put the writing in there to do the 8A set aside planning. So based off the executive order and the AFAR's guidance for customers to be able to meet their small business goals. We're going to use the FedRAMP standard for the cloud services. And also on our website, we are going to have minimum requirements so that when a customer comes to the CHESS website and wants to find information out about a company, that there's information for them to find right there. Okay, so what we need white papers, we need your input. You know, you guys see a different side of the business than we do. So the only way we can get better at our partnership is if we work together. So any type of white papers through the evaluation process, like how we do pricing, the geographical location, inflation increase, we kind of ran into that with our economic situation we have right now. And then what have you guys seen elsewhere? And then also the feedback on those 26 categories that were recently added to 3S. If there's anything missing or could make it better, please let us know. Okay, so based on what we learned with 3S, that if you ask for it, there can be a viability determination made. And we plan to do it because it worked. The team says it worked pretty well for 3S, so we're going to redo it for 4S. And then we always encourage teaming partnership between businesses because it allows you to gain in your performance. You get more insight on top of the work that the federal government is asking for you to do. Plus, it allows some of those smaller business to keep their little piece of the pie where they're really good at it. I'm not going to read this to you. But basically what it comes down to is that we want to find a way to do on-ramping, which doesn't require us to reevaluate the entire contract. We understand like there's a way to off-ramp with lots of paperwork, but we also understand we need to look at how to on-ramp, especially when there's some of these small businesses that want to get a bigger piece of the pie. So just keep in mind that we are looking at this. If, you know, send all your comments if you've seen it done successfully elsewhere or poorly elsewhere. Please let us know through the KO office because we do want to find a way to make that happen. Okay, so Jerry mentioned the gatekeeper role. I thought it was a bottleneck, but it does have its use because, you know, if you're not trained in acquisition, like most of the military, you still got to buy stuff. And so we constantly end up being a mentor to kind of go, no, no, go over here. No, no, go over there. And we're trying to stay that role and kind of build it out larger. So you guys don't get, you know, requests for business that isn't yours. Like we direct them to the right contract, you know, with the whole statement of non-availability as well, just trying to keep that, input it into the system. So one, it doesn't slow down, but two, we're not just sending you contracts you can't bid on. Okay. So, my 2 cents, before we dive into questions is that October 17th, Fort Belvoir, FCA, is going to be hosting a symposium, and we'll be talking about this some more. In the spring, we are going to be having our own industry day. The timeline will get a little bit more solidified after the RFI responses come back in, and we can go from there. Questions, comments?
What was meant by suites?
It's just the different like categories of labor categories, like trying to determine like, people use different terms, tiers, pools, whatever, but it's kind of like how you have a AI labor category, senior engineer versus a junior help desk labor category. Like, how do we allow people to propose the right dollar amount for those labor categories within the contract?
One additional question is, I think the existing ITES-3S required a number of, I guess, RFIs or RFP submittals before off ramping. Do you think something similar will be in place for ITES-4S?
So one of the way we track how the performance of the contract is tracking the company's response to the RFIs and RFPs. You know, and we are pulling all of that data from 3S to wrap into 4S. Are you trying to say like you don't want to be tracked that way?
Well, no. I guess some companies have been put under a little bit of pressure for participating versus being off ramps.
Mm.
And I think there was like a minimum requirement per year of like, I think what, 20 or 30%.
Well, when people sign up for the contract, you're signing up to support it and participate in it. If you're not going to, you're paperwork. So, you know, we tried to lower the percentage that they had to respond to. I think it's down to like 3% or something right now, and some people still aren't even meeting that.
I think the bottom line is that you had to figure out a way to evaluate the companies, and since the RFPs are the main goal of the contract, that was how it was determined to evaluate the companies, and there you had to meet the minimum standards. Every company, be it small business or large business, has to bid the proposals, and therefore that's why Sarah mentioned the teaming agreements.
Mm.
You know, we want you to be, all inclusive. And if you're a large company and have the small businesses that can support those niches, then you're going to be able to bid those proposals. And that's why that is the primary determination of an evaluation of the company's participation in the contract. That was the whole reason for developing the gold gatekeepers, so that, we would ensure that the contracts that were being requested or the proposals that were being requested were valid. And also on the reverse side, when the company bid out of scope, we asked for the additional information to be able to determine, hey, is this a valid out of scope determination? So, we're trying to, and that feedback from the companies, both in the annual meetings and in the out of scope meetings has been invaluable in helping us determine that.
Yeah. There it goes.
Hi, I'm Jeff Vignay with Exeter. I have a question, kind of a follow-up to where, to that last thought. In the second or third year of ITES-3S, there was an action taken by the government where several organizations, large and small, were asked to either give up or have their contract removed for lack of participation.
Mhm.
My point of curiosity for, at the milestone of ITES-3S, at the 5-year anniversary after recertification, do you foresee another action similar to that, or do you feel that it's not warranted at this time?
I would like to see another option or another action on that. Because, nobody likes to have to do paperwork and tell someone they are not performing. It's kind of demoralizing. So for whoever's being told that, as well as my coworkers that have to write up the paperwork. I don't know if the contracting office is willing to engage that right now, but I will talk to my team about it and we'll see. Yes.
Good morning. Appreciate your time this morning. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the RFP schedule? Pat, so we have Industry Day in spring of 24.
Mhm.
Are you still, is there any chance of the schedule sliding left or right? Or are you pretty confident you're gonna meet the projected schedules as it is?
I like my job, so I'm not gonna slide it right. We have been, I've only had this job since December, and since January, every other month, we're briefing someone who tells us we take too long in contracting. If you heard, Mr. Bang and Garciga and, my boss, Mr. Gucker, talk about it, it's all about automation. Well, obviously, we can't automate the source selection evaluation board process. There's kind of laws against that. So it's like, how do we make it where we tell you how we're going to grade you so that you can propose so that we can then grade you, right? So it's like, how do we cut down on that? So if you guys have any ideas, like not telling the KOs how to do their job, but how to make the evaluation process a little bit easier for us when there's not spreadsheets, it's mainly narrative, that would be useful. But yeah, we have been told repeatedly to move it to the left. Yeah.
Patrick Novak from Decision Point. How many firms aren't hitting that RFI response rate?
A lot.
It's a lot, like 30 to 40.
I don't know, honestly. I just know there's a good chunk. Yeah,
Technically, like that.
yeah, it's a technical term, good chunk. Yes.
Is there any thought going forward into, rather than doing an all or nothing where a company has to have a significant team to do categories? I've been seeing this come out in other IDIQs where they've
Mhm.
got several categories of areas, and then a vendor can qualify for all four, whatever,
Mhm.
or they can just qualify for one, and then that enables them to have a higher response rate for their niche areas plus a few others.
So a couple other vendors have brought that up. So we're definitely going to talk to the contracting office about it. It's a little bit different when you try to split it up that way, the manpower that it takes to manage the contract. So yeah, I mean, if you could put that in RFI response, that would help trigger the contracting office to research it too, but other companies have mentioned that.
How many additional NAICS codes do you anticipate maybe being added to the vehicle?
I think 2 or 3 where it's going to be the total amount.
So not a contracts person, so bear with me. It looked like you were coming pretty close to the 2.1 billion ceiling. So is that like a hard ceiling? Like you'll have to go to, you'll have to award ITES 4, or can you just increase the ceiling on 3? I guess that's the first of them.
We can increase it. It just requires the speed of bureaucracy and paperwork. So.
Okay. And it sounds like since you said you come to the end of the first 5-year base period and, a lot of smalls are going to have grown out of it and you've got some that haven't responded. Is that, if you continue 3, would that mean you would entertain bringing on new smalls, new contract awards, or you just have to wait for 4?
So the only way we can bring people on right now is through partnering with companies that are already on the contract. Because the way the contract's set up right now and the advice we've got through the contracting office is if we add vendors to the contract, we have to reevaluate everything. And one of the reasons I have a 5-year contract is so you don't have to do another SSCB. But there are option years, so there will be a bleed over time between 3S keeps going and then we award 4S.
As time goes on, just naturally, you're gonna have, well, after the 5-year base, you're gonna have much smaller pool of small businesses will be valid for ITES-3, right?
So I didn't hear the last part of that.
So if, you know, the 5-year base period is over, so you're expecting a number of smalls will either have grown out or they're not meeting their minimum threshold. So you'll have a much smaller pool of smalls, for example, that could bid on anything on ITES-3. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it happens. Small businesses get purchased or they graduate to be big businesses. I mean, we don't kick them off the contract for that. They just move into a different pool. The non-performers is, you know, we want competition. We want the American economy to do well. So we don't want to kick people off, but I also don't like everyone having to do so much paperwork. Just, you know, every year they have the vendor meetings and it takes from October to December for the team to go through them.
Yes, ma'am. So the ones that do grow out from being smalls will just be kicked over to the large category. Is that
Correct.
right? Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hi, are you guys planning to add 541512 as a NAICS code to this for like software development, or is this gonna stay mostly hardware with a software component?
That is a very good question. And afterwards, will you give me that code so I can write it down? There's different ways to do it. Obviously, we want to make it competitive for everyone, right? We want the, you know, the cloud agencies and all the other organizations that are building clouds to have their own developing and however they want to do it, right? Because they have to come to us. So how do we help them use our contract and make it competitive for everyone? So like our team right now has been looking at what have we been giving statement of non-availabilities for? Like saying, oh, we can't do it for you, go elsewhere. So that then we can build the contract off that. Specifically about that code, I don't know. I know it's mainly going to stay more in the services area, but it is something we can look at for software development.
You know, I might add it on the cloud services area. We just added this, mentioned the 26 labor categories in AI, ML, and cloud services. That to me sounds like it would be a good labor category in one of those areas. But if there's a special NICS code, like Sarah said, there, you know, we're looking at what possible NICS codes are going to be there to support the enterprise infrastructure. And that sounds to me like a very valid possibility.
Anything else?
Thank you, babe.
Hold on.
Government considered or so Army Accent was a vehicle that was also managed under CHESS. And I think there was, I guess, lack of understanding from hiring activities on how to actually or put opportunity requirements on that. With the potential for a high side and low side, is there any lesson learned from Accent and is preventing some of the previous issues with this potential high side and low side?
Do you know CHESS Accent? Yeah, I don't know what CHESS Accent is, but I can tell you we've been re-looking at doing a lot of our training, especially coming out here, just trying to like get the Signal Schoolhouse or the capability development people out at Fort Leavenworth. And we're redoing our training and then we're going to go test it out on the poor souls at APG to try and get not just the PMs, but also the KOs to understand like this is how to use our vehicles, our website, and how to put it through that way. Because mentioned earlier is like acquisition aren't the people buying everything. There's a lot of soldiers out there.
And again, I'd add that the 3S proposals have to be submitted by a contracting office. You know, it has to be the KO or the KS because as Sarah mentioned earlier, they are so complicated and involved, whereas on the other DIQ type contracts that we do, it can come from an organization, you know, request for quote can be submitted by a user organization. But on this contract, it is very detailed and very involved. So it is the KOs and KSs that have to submit the RFPs. And that's where the training guide that Sarah just talked about really comes into play.
Yes.
Okay, going back to the NAICS code question, if you have multiple NAICS codes, so let's assume 541611, which has a much lower size standard than I think the one mentioned 5112, which, you know, we're talking about $10-20 million in revenue. How will that work for small businesses? Will you be allowed to bid to the highest dollar amount or the lowest dollar amount? Because you'll eliminate a ton of small businesses if you put 541611 on there, me being one of them. And if you put something with a $34 million NAICS, then we're still in it. And, you know, that's very concerning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how would that multiple NAICS code work how do you envision that working if you have multiple size standards?
So that's one of the things that's going into our market research. Like, we don't want to limit it. We want to provide the competition. So we're not going to put anything in there that would completely, you know, block businesses from applying or having interest in being on the contract. So it's just part of the market research, we'll say, because they've been talking about it since before I got here. So they're still trying to figure out what's the correct one to use.
CIO SP4 has a track record where if you graduated from a small to a large, there is a category assigned for that. Is that something that's going to be taken into consideration for 4S potentially?
So when we do our contract building, we try to create it so that there's areas for small businesses and areas for large businesses. And we want to keep it out there and open for anyone to bid on it. So if there is a POC that we can have at CIO SP4, I mean, we'd like to talk to them about it, how they have it set up, so we can see if it's something that would fit our customer base as well.
RS3 uses the 541, 517, which is a 1,000-person small business NAICS. So would you guys ever consider something like that?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, RS3 uses the 541, 517 NAICS, which is a
Okay.
1,000-person small business. Would you guys ever consider something like that?
I mean, it could be potentially, it kind of goes back to what other people have brought up about pools or tiers of, you know, where people are allowed to bid on. If everyone bids on pool 1, then they can't be in pool 2, different things like that. I mean, there's so many ways to build a contract. So we're doing the research to try to figure out what are the options out there, but then also what is right for the Army, as well as the other DoD customers that use the contract. Anybody else? Yes.
Morning. I understand this presentation was for vendors and it's a new system that you're putting out to the vendors. Will you have a couple minutes after your presentation to answer some customer questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you currently have a plan to limit the number of awardees on either small or large?
No. So there's always a percentage that has to be built in the contract. We'll hold off, like, so many awardees will be small businesses. And then so many can be small or large. And then there's the percentage for, you know, veteran-owned, all those type of stuff that will be in the contract. What we will plan to have. I can't say right now, but it will probably be very similar to what we currently set up.
Okay, thank you. And secondary question B, has there been discussions on what the past performance requirements will be for either small or large pool?
No, not yet. I mean, we have been talking about it. We've been taking a lot of lessons learned from other contracts and trying to figure out, because we understand that the vendors send out those past performance questionnaires and then you're kind of on the mercy of some government person having time to fill it out and carry. But it is important that you provide the POCs so that then we can contact them or the KO can contact them and we can go from there. There will be a past performance rating because we want to know that you can fill the scope of the contract. One last call. Okay, thank you for your time. Hello, let him do his thing. About.
All right, well, Sarah and Jerry, I want to thank you for, joining us this morning and the insightful remarks and the ability for our audience to ask questions. And I guess also you're willing to stick around for some client questions. In lieu of a speaker gift, AFCEA will make a donation to the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society on your behalf. We're going to take a break now. Our next session in here does not began until I think 11:30. So we've got some time here. And I will see you back for that.
Thank you.
Actually, I think it's 10:30. 10:30.
Shindig. Yep.
All right, good morning again. One person got it, okay. Good morning again. All right, great. Hey, welcome back from the break. We're gonna go ahead and jump right into our next session. We've got a panel on tactical weapon systems, continuous cyber monitoring. It's led by Matt Paserno. Before I introduce the Matt, the moderator here, please note that this session has been pre-approved to support continuing education for several CompTIA or JIAC or Cert Nexus cybersecurity certifications. ASCIA members can receive attendance documentation by scanning badges at the iPad at the back of the room at the conclusion of this session. As the ASALT Chief Cyber Acquisition Officer, Mr. Paserno serves as a primary staff point of contact for cyber policy, system security, engineering, cyberspace survivability, threat monitoring, and major incident responses. Matt's bio, as well as the other panelists that he will take care of introducing, their bios can be found on the website or the conference website or the app. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and his panel. Matt.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to be here. The panel today is on tactical weapon system cybersecurity, continuous monitoring. But what we're really here is to do one thing, and that's to ask for your help. This is an ongoing effort to make sure that our weapons across Echelon and at scale across the globe, connecting to whatever network they connect to, are defended. And so that's a team sport. So we've got folks from our cyber here, we've got folks from the PMs here, but we need ACM support, we need operators and budgeting support, we need training and sustainment support. So we're really hoping that this is just a conversation, and the real work will begin at 11:31 when we hope to get your all support to come on for the big win. With that, let me just introduce the team quickly, and then they'll do more introductions as we get into it. Major Promotable Sherburne from our cyber, Mr. Jim Marks from PEO Aviation, Dr. Tim from MIT Lincoln Lab, and then Mr. Ian Vance from our team at DASADES in ASALT. A couple things up front, what we're doing, a lot of good things are happening across the PEOs and across the PMs and at our cyber from a data standpoint. We're not gonna go into specifics on any one program, but we're really talking about how some of these pieces, as General Stanton mentioned, need to integrate better. We can't approach this as individual pieces. We have to have a more coordinated approach. So we're not going to talk about any specific vulnerabilities in systems. We're not going to talk about particular countermeasures in specific systems. Anything related to a particular system is really notional for an example, so we don't get in trouble. This is a complex issue, a complex topic. So when those arise, I like to think, what would Mr. Bang do? You can quote me on that, and please, if you see him, tell him I said that. In his seminal address on Tuesday, he talked a lot about remediation and not just admiring problems, not just continuing to do assessments. So from that and a lot of ongoing work, we really wanted to look at how we can sense and monitor the tactical environment. What we've arrived at is what we're calling the defensive overwatch reference architecture. What he talked about on Tuesday was getting after SOAR. And we as a panel have been discussing this. We don't even know if we can do that, but that's our goal. There's a lot that goes behind that to actually have full orchestration and response. We don't know if on things like helicopters, we should have automated response. But what we need is this architecture to really understand three things that I always focus on: what's feasible, affordable, and effective. So we know that physics will prevent us from sensing everything. We know that the budget will prevent us from sensing and monitoring everything. What are the key things that we have to focus on? How do we understand and visualize terrain? And then how do we actually do something that is effective? What we don't want is this reference architecture to be another leather-bound book on a nice mahogany shelf next to a whole bunch of other system security plans. We want this to actually drive investments, inform requirements, and then ultimately help operators maintain readiness. So that's the goal. We needed to get it right, and that's why we're here today to have a discussion, not only among our team, but I'd love to get to questions and feedback as quickly from the audience as well. Mr. Bang talked a lot about getting to continuous ATO. I think that's a good thing, right? That's a good goal to have, but in many conversations with him, he is much more concerned about all of the pieces required to get to continuous ATO, particularly with active cyber defense. We can have individual programs and individual efforts attack that separately, but it's not going to be effective against a PRC unless we are actually integrated, as General Stanton said. So we believe that this defensive overwatch reference architecture that we are proposing and working through is a key component of that to help programs and defenders understand how some of these pieces come together. I'm showing the quote super high overview of defensive overwatch as we see. We've got a lot more diagrams and graphics, but we figured we would probably spend more time nitpicking the diagrams and graphics rather than talking about what we're trying to do. So we see this as a tiered approach. At the top, you've got US Cybercom, JFHQ DODIN. They've got obviously things like unified platform and things like that. At the tier 2 level below that, we've got our cyber, we've got Netcom, we've got joint networks, we've got coalition networks, and some of the things from an ASOL perspective in our weapon systems deploy across all of that. So in the bottom, where we're looking at kind of individual systems with individual local operators and defenders, we've got things like Office IT, which is kind of easier, but they get significantly more complex as you go down to that bottom right corner, where you've got, which we weren't even thinking about till we talked about FORSCOM, you've got Office IT in tactical environments, right? You've got Office IT in command posts that are being monitored and defended by sixes and that type of community. Then you've got non-Office IT, which is even more complex, weapon systems, air platforms, missiles, things like that. Some of those are running things like Windows new operating system. Windows and Linux, they're running TCP/IP networks, but then you've got other things below that that are the real-time operating systems, the serial buses, the things like that. And so it's very easy to get tripped up on over-sensing one thing and having completely undefended adjacent terrain next to it. That's a critical avenue of approach. So what we're trying to get after is how do we enable this multi-echelon approach to Overwatch that is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, but at least sets the left and right boundaries of what we can do so that we can actually give that guidance to programs to inform defenders and actually realize that. I'm done talking. We want to have dialogue. I'm going to turn it over to Ian to kind of explain how we kind of see the terrain and what our goals and approaches are going to be. So I'll ask each of the panel members to talk about what DORA is to them from their perspective and their key inputs. Mr. Vance.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I see defensive overwatch as the convergence between ensuring a system's configuration has not been adversely affected and the ability to do something about it if it has. The first part of that requires two things. The first is a thorough understanding of the number of endpoints or fielded instances of a baseline. And the second is visibility into that configuration. And we need to do that at an ASAult level, a portfolio level, to make sure that we are not answering this question individually each time a PM is approached.
Okay. Dr. Tim?
Right. So ultimately what we're trying to do with DORA is to build an architecture that makes it easy for the Army to make good decisions, right? From investment decisions or technological decisions. And at the same time, we'd like to look at different ways of, different, as Matt had said, there's different sorts of data are coming off of tactical systems. And we'd like to see if there's commonalities or abstractions we can build that converts this data into things that are, traditional enterprise DCO defenders are used to seeing. So we can do a sort of, so they understand the language and it sort of provides a first level of defense against, for these systems.
Awesome. And Major Sherburne?
So first off, DORA is our deliberate effort to mature and modernize our continuous monitoring program and build the Army of 2030. This architecture is to be fully integrated with our unified network, grounded in a transport agnostic data-centric, zero trust enabled hybrid cloud, and one in which can support multi-domain operations and provide the data needed for our commanders to make decisions. Commanders must have all relevant information at their disposal to make informed decisions, answer their commanders' critical information requirements, specifically friendly force information requirements, or more plainly stated, how do I see our own forces? Historically, this has been tracking maintenance readiness status and location data of our weapons platforms. Today, that also needs to include our cyber readiness. It is going to drive how our combatant commanders will conduct their operations. It is going to inform our defensive cyber operations and provide a team of cyberspace defenders with the ability to plan, coordinate, and synchronize cyberspace incident response actions. DORA will be able to provide the data necessary to the commanders at Echelon required to make a decision no matter which level of the continuum of conflict or continuum of conflict, whether that be competition, crisis, or conflict. In the cyber domain is not myopic to a specific theater of operation. It is everywhere at any point in the continuum of conflict. It can be at home station. It can be training at NTC, or it can be forward. All avenues of approach to these weapons platforms that occur in any one of these areas in the land domain could be exploited in the cyber domain. And so we cannot be just focused on the classic OB1 here, where you assume that we're talking about forward immediately, but we do tie in where we show the buildings off to the back, what is happening there. As we engineer this architecture, it has to be about the data. What is the correct data to collect? How do we secure, move, understand, and analyze the data? This data is not just your normal IT-based data. It is operational technology, predominantly military standard 1553 CAN bus data within these platforms, and will require a workforce knowledgeable in OT. And the fact that the primary focus in OT is availability and safety. You can't just shut down an aircraft communication bus mid-flight in response to a threat. DORA will need to incorporate other relevant data from systems, also tied in the unified network, that serve to patch and upgrade our weapons platforms. And so this is not just about the capability or technical measures to support DORA, but it will also be about the capacity, that is our people, our talent management to fully realize this. This will require our data scientists, our data managers and engineers to support this, and our big data platform enhanced with AI ML to get the correct data to the correct commander staff at Echelon to support the most informed decision to gain and maintain the initiative.
Thank you for pointing out that our OV is insufficient. No, just kidding. So we've got that going. No, just kidding. We've been talking through this for a while, so just to lighten it up. But I think the reference on the air platform is key, and I think part of what makes the Army mission so challenging is the complexity, the scale. We usually try to think about aircraft that has to go through survivability and airworthiness training and things like that, as if it works for that, then it'll probably work in like the easier cases on the ground or something like that. And so to transition to that, Mr. Jim Marks from PEO Aviation, lead the way.
So from a PM or PEO perspective, one looks at this concept as, or at least I do, as a blade without a handle, because it allows you to provide some much needed utility, but at the same time it provides a way of really damaging yourself, right? And we've demonstrated no lack of inability to harm ourselves, probably worse than what the enemy might provide. And so we have to be very cognizant and diligent that with capability comes the ability to harm oneself. And so and to that end, right, I was reading a book a couple of months ago, and it said that we live in a kind of a, what is the word? Well, anyway, so we live in the information age, but the paradox is that so many people live in this information age and yet have no idea how that information is actually used and what it truly means. And so with that comes an extremely high amount of danger, because with ignorance is how you end up shooting yourself. And so we have to be very, very cognizant as we try to bring this capability online, we don't give ourselves or our opponents the ability to create additional attacks that did not exist previously.
I think that's key it's part of the balance of what we do to ourselves. I think over sensing and providing more tools is just more land for the enemy to live off of in some cases. So we have to make sure that what we're doing again is actually effective. Awesome. Well, thank you. I'll start with Ian. So from an ASAult perspective, what do you think success looks like?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think success from an ASAult perspective is the implementation of a tool that helps program managers, PMs understand the technical feasibility, the affordability, and the effectiveness of platform anomaly detection or intrusion detection capabilities. We plan to do that by stating the objectives of DORA in the form of questions. So the first question is, given the constraints of a given system or class of systems, are there capabilities currently available to collect information from a system in operation to determine if a cyber effect is present or an intrusion has been detected? That's the could we question. The second question is, in a fiscally constrained environment, does the cost of implementing a censoring and monitoring solution on a given system or class of systems outweigh the benefit based upon factors considered? That's the should we question to go along with could we. And then third is, what set of data, either directly collected or abstracted and analyzed at a higher level, needs to be collected to provide a defender with enough information for them to understand the effect or the intrusion for a given system or class of systems. That's the if we did, what would it look like question. And then the last is knowing that the higher network tiers already employ endpoint security solutions and event monitoring. How does the data collected in accordance with the above integrate with current capabilities to inform decisions and or actions by defenders? That's how does it integrate with higher tier capabilities? So I think if we can provide a tool that helps program managers answer those four questions, then I think that we are successful from an ASAult perspective. Thank you.
Awesome. And that, Jim, that'll be helpful at the PM level. Having that build to architecture.
Right.
Awesome. All right, Major Sherborne, what types of decisions do you think that DORA will help commanders or operators and defenders make? At what echelons?
Yep, that's a fantastic question, Mr. Paserno. So alluding to it, right, was able to try to get that remark out there up front. But again, this is about multi-domain operations. We're not here myopically focused on either DCO or CSSP actions, but how that is sequenced, time tempoed along with the operation. Should there be an active operation going on, for that requisite commander at that echelon to understand the information they need for that decision. We can't just focus strictly on the data at hand. This is yet another network. This is yet another seam. There's a lot that goes into this to understand first, what are the decisions that need to be rendered by the commander? Is it a decision point that has to take place? They need to have that information to allow them to understand, can they move on to the next phase of the operation? And again, it goes back to their CCIRs or FFIRs specifically, and there could be a whole host of other decisions rendered. I'll just make it very broad for this, this classification and discussion, and that has to be thought about. So we need to strengthen people in partnerships. We have to include the operational commanders as a part of this to make sure that we get the data right. You can't talk about getting the correct data to the correct echelon at the correct time without it. So we are not going to be all in a building just putting this architecture together without understanding that first. This should not be treated as yet another network, although it is unique. We did stipulate already a couple of, you could call them constraints, that just need to have outside the box thinking about how you would employ counter actions on that terrain. That's all. But it needs to be an ecosystem along with your IT, infrastructure because there is data within that infrastructure that all needs to be correlated together to provide a complete site picture for the commander. And then across from the combatant land commander then is also cyber, and then formulating a response on the defensive cyber space operations side. And so the data needed in order to understand what size force, where to employ, when to employ, how to employ, can it be employed remote? Do we have to send anybody forward? And so having that data processed and analyzed will assist those in the cyber command domain to be able to render those appropriate decisions.
No, I think that's a great point. And if you start with the decision of do we have to send someone forward, and if you don't want to do that each time and you work backwards, I think having an architecture where all of these pieces sets conditions so that you can avoid that and have more effective overwatch in near real time.
And this is not just about land and cyber, but all the other domains as well, as we conduct a joint fight. And so then we have to also consider that our weapons platforms do not operate just on Army networks, but will cross over to others or coalition, or weapons platforms that are operated by coalition forces, and needing to understand data from those as well as we process and understand where threats are located, when, where, and how to remediate. So this is including not just the joint, but also our coalition partners as well. And so we have to consider that in this architecture as well, that this is not just Army specific.
Yeah, I think, and to your point, that, I mean, the graphic is certainly like a simplification of a very complex problem for discussion. But I think even what you're saying too earlier is this is definitely a .mil PFP approach, right? There's things that we need to do across all of this. We also can't boil the ocean. There's things that we can start to do now, but this is more of an evolution as we continue to go.
And I think I just like to call out one of the lines here on the OB1. Cyber data reach back from higher echelons effectively brings appropriate cyber expertise to the field. So we've heard several times over the last week, we want to simplify, we want to flatten, and we want to be able to provide that expertise at the edge without putting undue burden on the defenders there. So I think that's key of providing that data liquidity, to use Mr. Bang's terms, from the very tip of the tactical edge all the way back to your higher tier defenders and defensive cyber operators.
Yes, and we need to be on a data diet, right? when we do that. So, but I mean that comes back to what, even just some basic things like what are we trying to do at lower echelons? What are we trying to do? When are we doing SIEM and just net ops versus and DoD ops versus enabling DCO? What data can stay resident? What data products can we send? What do we actually have to move by exception? All of those things aren't going to orchestrate themselves by chance. So I think that's a lot of what we're trying to get after to better understand. And I think it's also about not just what we're generating, but what we also know is out there, whether it's an MPE system or a user built system. All of those pieces need to come together because the enemy doesn't look for the most hardened avenue of approach. All right, Tim, what research from a broader perspective do you think is applicable to answering these sorts of challenges?
Right. So I'm not going to cover all of it. Obviously, Lincoln Laboratory has done a lot of research in this area. But I'd like to highlight a few things. For many years, we ran an internal research NOC where we collected data coming into and out of our network. And there we learned a lot of lessons about, what sorts of data collections you need, how you should store and analyze that data, and, how you can, find, potentially find incidents that are happening live. Now, we would like to, this door is an opportunity to extend that kind of research into, less traditional tactical systems, for example. The laboratory is also built, doing a lot of work with multiple services. We've mentioned this several times. There's a joint component to this. We need to build, I don't want to call it standards, data. We want to understand what the data should be so that it can be shareable across not just multiple echelons in the Army, but also with joint and coalition partners, right? So, the laboratory's done a lot of work helping build our different components of the JICWA architecture and, zero trust studies. And, a lot of these things are, can inform this reference architecture we're trying to design.
Thank you. Jim, it all sounds easy. What are you, from your perspective, are some of the constraints that you see in implementing this?
The knowledge base is going to be vastly different, right? Because what a cyber threat looks like, or a cyber threat from a traditional IT or just generic IT is going to not be completely dissimilar, but it's not going to be identical either. It rhymes versus repeats, to paraphrase George Martin. So just because you see something happen on a bus isn't necessarily indicative of an attack, because in a tactical weapon system like an aircraft or a tank, you're going through serious environmental situations, from either just the general vibration, heat, shock, all of these things, different gases, oxidation. I mean, they are going, basically the adage is that helicopters, you're basically just fighting to keep them from crashing. Just like with boats, you're trying to keep them from sinking. So being able to discern the difference between a typical maintenance action and what would appear as a cyber attack are going to be extremely challenging. And I think it's only through heuristics that that's going to be obtainable, because well, at least for your traditional weapon systems, right? I can't speak to the attack surface of future systems, because as those capabilities increase, so too does their attack surface. But with the more traditional stuff, the internal networks, the TCP/IP networks, 1553 or CAN bus, what have you, they're well defined. Even the usage of TCP/IP networks are going to be well defined. So you're not going to have ARP poisoning or DNS poisoning or any of that. You're not going to have like an IP ping attack, because all those services, if they were properly designed for determinism, which is a requirement for embedded operation, is going to be shut down. And if those things are available, then that would be a finding that would need to get rectified. And so that's where a first principles approach versus a more reactive approach is really helpful. But you have to be able to find those deficiencies, because things are going to get through the net, right? And I think that the real value from this kind of architecture comes from getting rid of some of the more siloed ancillary systems, like maintenance devices or mission planning devices that are kept off the net to protect themselves from both ourselves and from the enemy. They can benefit from a more well-informed and purpose-built architecture, to where we can leverage the security that comes with having network monitoring on those without subjecting them to some of the risks of being on an enterprise network, following more traditional enterprise patterns and reactions.
I think breaking down the silos is key, and integrated deterrence comes from integrated defense. That doesn't happen by chance. So I know we talked for about 30 minutes. I'd love to get some feedback or comments or questions from the audience, if anybody has any.
I have a question. How,
Sure.
how do you reconcile the DACO authority when you're in the COCOM switching from our cyber, who has DACO for DOTA to US Cyber Command? Right, because I think that what we heard earlier this week was about, continuous monitoring supporting the DACO authority. But something changes when you get in the field, the title authority, it changes as well. Over.
So I think the question was about DACO and authority. I guess Major Sherburne, do you want to? say what we can say about that without getting ahead of leadership?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I heard it right. I think your mic wasn't quite on. Don't worry. So I think what you were saying was either data portability between whether that data is going to us versus, you said, Cyber Command.
It's really who directs cyber actions in the field in the COCOMs. And I believe that comes from US Cybercom. I don't know that it would flow through our cyber.
Right.
Is
So
it-
as we're conducting the deliberate effort to mature and modernize both this architecture, I think what we're going to end up seeing here with a newfound data to process and provide to these commanders, that we're going to be able to see also the mature and modernizing of where those actions are going to be dictated from.
And then my other question is that it's the many to one issue. If you're going to get a tool, are you going to have, I mean, that will basically be the logistics of where these systems are deployed, which we really don't have now. But that's going to be, I mean, is that aggregated going to get to the TS level? And how do you even manage hundreds of thousands of systems, right?
Okay, Roger. And again, I don't know why the mic's not working, but so yeah, right. What you're saying is, when we do gain observability per this architecture during this mature and modernizing process, is what tool, how it's processing data, where's the data going, and then at what classification. All amazing considerations. Exactly.
I think without getting into the specifics of like decision-making and authority, I think it's hard to make an informed decision if you don't have visibility, right? And so I think the first step of that is a situational understanding of trying to get like what is even sensed, what is the network, what are the potential threats, at least informing the commander, and then being able to go through courses of action development to figure out what to do. So I think this is without figuring out or getting ahead of like our Cybercom. I think this is just at least an enabler to start to do that. But I think General Fogarty and I were talking earlier this week about, you were talking about all of the other data. I think what's relevant to something like this is maybe the best way to understand where footprints are is leveraging big army systems like logistics systems and tying those rather than sensing every individual widget. It's one thing to know that I have a vulnerability in a tank, but if we don't know who has the tanks, where they are, what the last time they were maintained are, then our problems become much more pervasive. So I think part of this is looking more holistically, leveraging the big green machine when it's feasible. And because I think our biggest obstacle in just about any of this is scale and being dynamic. So if we're hard coding things, to one tool, then we're going to be brittle and we're going to break. Any other comments, thoughts, questions? Okay. Ian?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the middle there, sir. I think we are trying to build the architecture to inform those next level decisions. Understanding that there are currently the landscape is not orchestrated, and we are trying to bring some orchestration to that landscape so that it fits into an architecture that can be utilized by our cyber or lower level defenders to make those decisions. The data is key there. Making sure the data is normalized and understandable in a way that actions are can be quickly taken is important, because like my colleagues here mentioned, the data is going to look vastly different than what's coming into a normal enterprise SIEM environment. This is 1553 traffic or CAN bus traffic, and if you just record source, destination, and change, it's not really going to mean anything to anybody that doesn't understand that particular system. And worse than that, the training that is necessary to understand that detail of the system doesn't come overnight. So understand your question. I wouldn't say it's aspirational. I think that we're probably closer than your question leads on. But we are trying to build that infrastructure and that architecture for future solutions to fit into.
But one thing that you said that resonated with me is and I forget how you said it, but the data coming into something, we hope it's coming into something, right? Like that's aspirational. Without getting into specifics, at the tier 1 and tier 2 system, things that are doing monitoring look differently. And so from the generating force side, I think it's hard for us to know. We can sense, there's a difference between sensing and monitoring, right? We can install agents, but if we don't know where to send that data to, and the recipients of that data have different tools at their ends, whether it's an RCC or a joint JRSS or whatever it is, right? Like we need to bridge that divide so that the data actually is going somewhere. Go ahead. So I think the question was about, do we have the right skills at the right levels with the right understanding of the different unique terrain? I'd love feedback from the audience, but I guess Major Sherborne, from an operator defender standpoint, do you think we have?
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much a concern, but opportunity. So being an operational technology specialist within cyber, there's considerations, right? There's textbook learning, but then there's the actual being a part of that specific platform or critical infrastructure site. And so there is going to be, and always has been, a focus on what you consider the local network defender, or those that are already part of the system. And so when we talk about, especially when Mr. Garcia talked about simplicity, right? When we talk about any architecture, platform, system, that it is the easiest to use at the most tactical edge. And so what are the expectations of a particular MOS and training for that simplicity at that level? And then having a healthy balance between that and then a more in-depth knowledge base and response force, let's say within like DCO, and that being balanced by time of response or ability to engage. And so, yes, that requires folks to be not just OT. OT is facility related control systems. It's ICS, it's SCADA, it's DCS, distributed control systems. OT, at least how I see the world, is the overall catchphrase. That even includes when we talk about platform, vehicular system communications as well. And so what is it that we're looking at and what are we going to do with it? And I think that's very similar to how we approach with our amazing analytic support officers that conduct that deep level of analysis on even enterprise data and looking through, was that an anomaly or is that just part of how a system actually operates normally that we just didn't know about before? Because a certain vendor of a certain web browser just performs those actions, right, that we just didn't know about until now. And it's going to be similar with that. So it's going to be both training, modernization and maturation across the DCO force, but it's also going to be with those that are closer to the problem set, no matter where we are in the world, right? As we look at this OV1, we're forward, we're in training and making sure that's accomplished. You know, as we've seen in the past, on the product, the two other deployments, we've had our amazing FSRs field support reps to handle the minutia, even just on signal operate and maintain side. But similarly with cyber, having that requisite training built up for those folks, particularly specialists in those particular platforms, is key because each one operates differently and functions differently. So very, very good points on all fronts. And in terms of DCO, we already get after certain aspects of OT to be able to respond as needed. And then the opportunity that exists in our maturing and modernization as we build and set Army of 2030 comes here with this very architecture.
Major Sherbert, I like the way you began that with, we have an opportunity. I want to check what I'm about to say with you to make sure that I'm aligning. But so from my perspective, I think there's a long-term solution and a short-term solution. I think a long-term solution would be an opportunity to reach out to the schoolhouse and help them understand that this is something that we are interested in developing over the long period of time. And I think the short term is, one, making sure that anything that we put in the hands of a defender is understandable. That's I think key. Going back to the thing that I said earlier, which is this is not traffic that they're used to be they're going to be used to looking at. But more than that, I think that we can help develop playbooks to help make that more understandable. Of yes, you're going to get data coming off of these platforms that is presented in a way that actions are quickly discerned, but also playbooks of this is the step-by-step process to actually carry out those actions.
Absolutely. And I think when we look at this, right, you can't have every platform just sitting in the backyard here getting worked on. Digital twins. I assess, given the data available, that the digital twins is going to play a crucial role in supporting that aspect of .mil-PF training, as well as incorporating the products and solutions that would fall under this architecture for efficacy and feasibility.
And acknowledge that current assessment may change.
Absolutely.
Yes. Just so I think some of the stuff that you said is key too. So 2030, this isn't an immediate thing, setting the Army of 2030. And even if we train Army people, there's still the joint people that need to be informed as well. And so training implies that you've got the POI built, you've got like the facilities or the material to train on, or whether that's a digital twin or what have you. I think the people is going to be a key, but I don't know that we have right now the full site picture of all of the different intricacies of the terrain, the functions that need to occur, the material solutions that can support those functions, and the people are the right people in the place with the right skills and abilities. So I think laying this out is aspirational to that end, but I think we need to develop that site picture first, right? There are going to be gaps that we need to invest in. Maybe we can't do individual, if we're not going to censor everything, can we have small mission area aligned teams that are, whether they're looking at business systems or they're looking at missile defense or they're looking at aircraft, and we can train them on the specifics of that terrain and make them more feasible. But I think also a lot of that is getting those operators and defenders integrated earlier in the process for weapon systems, so that we can have better dialogue on how those would be defended and employed in the future. I think one of the previous questions also on where are we and how aspirational is this, I think is great. Planning, programming, budget, and execution. I don't think we are executing an integrated approach at the moment. We are planning that. ASALT works a lot to requirements. And so it's one thing to have a requirement that says, do CSSP, make sure it's defended, right? And that's paper deep. I think when we have a reference architecture and we have something that we can grade programs against, I didn't say grade programs, but we can measure programs against and actually assist programs in evaluating different vendor solutions, what functions they perform, and where they fit overall in that architecture. A, we made it a lot easier for the programs, and B, we were able to deliver a lot more integrated solution. So I think something like an architecture is something that a requirement can reference so that a program can put that in the plan and spend money against. But right now, my assessment is we've got a lot of individual approaches, but we need to kind of normalize those across something like this.
I think I've got something else to add to Joe's point, with the major. So your group is used to dealing with traditional IT stuff, even in an operational environment. And I think that for the more specific custom systems like weapon systems, the approach might need to the traditional approach needs to be modified to actually use system experts in the loop at the SOC level in order to make better informed calls and to better assess actual risk versus perception of risk. And so I think one of the steps we've taken to that is the formation of the AMCAT program. I see that as being highly leverageable for that expertise and adding that capability and creating that partnership with folks that are well trained and well seasoned for the traditional fight, and marrying that with the more embedded, custom, very diverse suite of systems that we have, is where we're going to achieve success in a successful solution, so that we don't cut ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. So when we talk about various operational technology, and we look at it strictly from what is the data placed into the system telling us, and then what's potentially happening, and I guess you could say reality. And again, all notional scenarios, but let's just say you're at a critical infrastructure site and all you see in the data stream is 2,000 packets of RDP. So who's remote desktoping at 2 a.m? That seems odd, doesn't it? So if somebody's not clued into how that site actually functions in the real outside of data, then somebody would naturally probably start to go, wow, that's interesting. There's 2,000 packets of RDP happening at 2 a.m. That seems really odd, doesn't it? Well, if you then have to talk, and this is to Jim's point, by being married up with the actual site operators, they might not be cybersecurity specialists, but one quick question before everybody starts spinning out of control, and you say, hey, what's going on at 2 a.m? Oh, well, there's a shift change. We're a 24/7 facility. There's a shift change at 2 a.m. Bob over here gets on and remotes into every single section of the site to just look at the health status of all these other systems located across the sprawling site. Oh, boom, solved. You put that one to bed. You don't have to keep digging into it. Likewise, if there is a physical sensor and it gets under freezing, below freezing, it acts up. But if all you're getting is the raw data that is then to be acted upon with AI/ML to assess if there's an anomaly, and we haven't yet gotten to the winter, and all of a sudden it gets to winter time and it gets below 32 degrees, and all of a sudden what looked like baseline, because you conducted all your baseline in the summer, now looks anomalous. And now you start to spin on that data specifically and starting to render decisions that probably were not best informed by even talking to the site operator. They would have told you, I've been working here for 20 years. I know for a fact that it gets below 32 degrees, just the nature of that one sensor. Don't ask us why we don't replace it and have something better, but it just acts up below 32 degrees. Ah, okay, so we don't have an anomaly. We don't have a cyber intrusion. Yes. And so I just wanted to be able to segue off Jim's point that absolutely, when doing this, being tied directly into the operators, the architects, the builders of these weapons platforms, very much helps when getting after what we're seeing with data versus what's potentially happening in reality.
I was going to jump in.
Yeah, please.
And I think having access to the data is key here, right? Because if you don't have the data, you don't have stuff to look at. You don't know, like you can learn. you want to get data, you want to get the right data. And so you might learn what the right data is as you go through these sorts of things, right? So.
And I think that comes back to, there's always a fixation on how did the system get censored? But we need to have that whole that whole higher echelon approach to, okay, it's great that the data's, we're collecting it, hopefully, but if it's not informing a decision, then what did we actually do? So from that perspective, Tim, where do you think we are looking compared to the other services in some of these areas?
I mean, I guess I alluded to this a bit earlier. You know, the lab has done a lot of work looking at, you know, different, the lab works with a lot of different services, right? And so there's you know, we don't want to build something that is not going to help inform joint or coalition sort of decisions as well. So I think that, you know, we have at the laboratory, we have some visibility into, we work with a lot of other services. We have visibility into what other services are doing. And so we can help provide some of the, you know, some of those interoperability or touch points, I guess.
Integration.
All right.
I guess, Ian, from that perspective, what would you like industry to understand from this effort so that they are integrated?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, you know, stabilize, simplify, flatten. I think it's simple. More censoring of systems without a plan to get data off board in a format that's understandable by defenders is unhelpful at best, and it's dangerous at worst.
Great. I guess, Jim, from your perspective, from a PM perspective, what does success look like?
That's a hard one, right? So to get back to first principles of what is the PM's job, our job is to deliver capability that is defined in the form of requirements that are informed by KPPs, right, within cost and schedule. So in order to have success within DORA, and this concept from a tactical weapons systems perspective, we need to truly take a look at what we think the real attack vectors are likely to be and define the requirement to defend against those and how to signal to monitoring systems that such a condition may have been met. I don't think without true deep dive analysis, you're going to be able to determine that without forensics, because it's going to be a challenge to discern the difference between a maintenance failure and an actual effect. But having clear articulable requirements on the types of attacks with KPPs that can be tested so that we can then generate the triggers to let the watchers know that something is afoot.
And probably last question, Major Sherborne, how do you see this integrating overall with MDO?
I think most of my previous points, you know, kind of work with that. I definitely see as we push forward with DORA that we're all a part of these future TEMs, right? Major General Ray fighting everybody down at TEM 11, talking about data and network security. But if we're not also talking about this on the side to make sure that this is all considered, we're not gonna be part of it. So strengthening people and partnerships across the board, across all MOSs, branches, services, you know, we can't fully realize this.
No, I think, and I keep coming back to your 2030 comment that this is not an overnight change. We need to really assess and see where we are and then invest wisely to get where we want to be to set 2030. So completely agree. Any other comments or questions from the group? Yep.
So we're talking tactical weapon systems. They're rarely unique to a particular service. If we talk to the other services to figure out, you know, maybe one service is going to approach aviation, rotary wing, Another is going to approach ground combat vehicles. And we talk to the other services to make sure we're taking this from a truly joint perspective. Over.
So let me pivot to Ian. So Ian's got a 58 megabyte brief of what the Army's using that he'd love to blow up your inbox with, because he does that to me. I think, we want to be informed, but I think we can't, just like vulnerabilities, we can't chase every solution. We're almost at a point where we just have to figure out what are the key functions that we're trying to do, set some standards or guidelines, and start driving folks to those. And maybe that's a joint solution, maybe that's an Army solution. But we just can't continue to shape solutions. We need to have that. And then we need to communicate that with industry for sure. But he'll definitely send it to you. Sir?
Hey, so first of all, this is a great discussion, and it's a critical topic of the Army and the Joint Force. I think you guys are taking the exact correct approach to this. It's very easy to get bombarded with things, quote solutions that aren't tied into anything. And I think we've all had a lot of hard lessons learned, right, over the last few years. The hardest thing is always seeing ourselves, and then second hardest thing is, which is linked to the first hard thing, is data flow, right? Once we map those, we have a tendency to figure out pretty quickly. We've got a lot of expertise, and we've seen this work, but you're providing a framework, and that reference architecture is critically important. And so I just applaud you guys for the approach that you've taken. I want to thank you for all the hard work that's ahead of you as you do this. And it's going to take everybody represented here from across the entire community to make this happen. And then I think the other thing you guys have done very effectively is you realize that you have to prioritize. So you can't do everything at once. And you have to identify a start point. So very well done, Matt, Ian, the whole team providing leadership on this topic. That's what we required, right? Was strong leadership, and you're getting a lot of attention now. So compliments and your best wishes as you get this thing together.
Appreciate it, sir. Thank you. All right, with that, I think we can end here. That's it for the panel. But as I said in the beginning, this is really just one milestone in an ongoing evolution. So we really need support. We really need continuous dialogue. I think we made a lot of things sound simple and lightning bolt level. That's just to paint the picture, but we really need input and feedback to get it right. So please come down and be a part of the team. Have a great conference. Thank you.
Real quick, Matt and panel, just want to thank you for invigorating discussion and candid discussion this morning. In lieu of a speaker gift, we're going to make a donation to the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society on y'all's behalf. This does conclude the program over here at the Georgia Cyber Center. I want to thank you all for joining us this week. Please join us back over at the Marriott, where we have begun serving lunch at the Reynolds Street lobby. The next session over in the Oglethorpe is the closing keynote, and I really want to emphasize this. We're very fortunate to have General Rainey, the commander of Army's Futures Command, that is going to be closing out. So I encourage you all to be over there to hear what he has to say as it relates to enabling a data-centric Army. Again, thank you, and see you over at the Marriott. Are you Okay, so I want to give you guys my card. I've been working quite a bit with Yellow Front. Okay. Yeah. I'd love to, just stay in touch with you and try to figure out,